There we go. And so I will send out a link to the recording to all those who registered, because I know that there's a lot that may not be here today, but wanted to see what the presentation was all about. My name is Sarah Watson. I am a senior analyst in the Office of Climate Planning at Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And my area is working on resilience, and I also help manage the Climate Resilience Fund. And this webinar is, actually, I'm going to go ahead and, problem is, like, when you have so many screens, you can forget what is where. There we go. Run over a couple of our ground rules real quick. Just for all the attendees, please stay on mute and off camera to avoid distracting our speakers. Big portion of this webinar is to have an extended question and answer period so that everybody can get feedback on their pre-proposals and ideas. And so when we're going through the presentation, two of our speakers will be giving an overview of these two programs. And feel free to type general questions about those grant programs into the chat during the presentation. We'll either answer them in the chat or we will answer them immediately following the presentations. And just as a reminder that the chat is public record. And then following the general grant questions, we'll call on attendees for questions about their specific projects and pre-proposals and ideas. Please either say that you would put something in the chat that you would like to ask a question, or you can use the raise hand function. And when we call on you, please identify yourself in any organization you are representing, if that's applicable. And then just as a note, if there's a disruption, we will first try to remove the individual from the meeting. And if we have to stop, we will restart and you can rejoin using your original link. So just as a quick agenda for today, just as a reminder, I'll be giving some introductions and going over a little bit of some of DEEP's resilience related programming or grant programming. And then we will hear from Kyle Gray and Joanne Throwe with Throwe Environmental about the Long Island Sound Futures Fund and the National Coastal Resilience Fund. And then we will participate in a program discussion about and get some feedback opportunities for you all. Just as we have a number of grant programs at DEEP. These programs have varying levels of application time when things are actually open for it. Right now, I believe the only one that is currently accepting applications is the urban forestry grant programs. When I send out these slides, these are all linked in there. But we have multiple urban forestry grant programs with an incredible amount of funding that's coming primarily from federal sources related to the bipartisan infrastructure law. And then we also have the Urban Green and Community Garden Grant Program that's also with the Open Space Program, OSWA. The Urban Green and Community Garden Grants can also help do some forms of localized green infrastructure in some of the communities that these are eligible for. And then we also have the Clean Water Fund Green Infrastructure Set Aside. That is a larger amount of money that comes in that is related to the Clean Water Fund. That is also federal and state funding together. And then we also have the Section 319 stormwater grants, which is primarily for water quality. And then also in process is a Long Island Sound Study funding that is also going to support with grants. And then also the Deep Climate Resilience Fund, which we expect to open applications for later this year. And just as a heads up, I know that a lot of folks always have questions about these programs, and I'm going to just give you the list of folks to contact, and this will come out to you all in an email so that you have this at your hand. So just, it's always helpful to contact folks if you have any questions. So I am now going to pass it over to Kyle Gray with Throwe Environmental, who is going to talk to us about the Long Island Sound Futures Fund.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. Good to see everybody. It's such a good turnout. I'm just gonna share my slides here. All right, looks like everybody can see that. If there's any issues, just let me know. All right, let's let this go into presentation mode. Perfect. Oh, well, thanks again, everybody. Excited to be presenting here today. This is the third time we've done this workshop, the third year in a row. So excited to bring these NFWF opportunities to folks in Connecticut. Again, the presentation is titled Coastal Resilience and Long Island Sound Watershed, Funding Opportunities for Connecticut. So we'll go over two specific NFWF opportunities, and we'll highlight a few others briefly that are available to folks in the Connecticut region. So a quick background on Throwe Environmental and who we are and kind of how we fit into the equation here, because to be clear, we are not NFWF. We're a consulting firm based out of Rhode Island in Bristol, and we work with a range of communities across the entire country, and more specifically in New England and on the East Coast, to help with climate and environmental funding and finance issues and capacity building and leadership development. So our work takes us nationally, but one of our projects is with the Fish and Wildlife Foundation, specifically to serve as field liaisons for the Long Island Sound Futures Fund and for the National Coastal Resilience Fund. So two different programs we're working on. Essentially, that field liaison support can take a lot of different forms, but it's meant to meet the applicants where they are and to meet folks, kind of in the middle and help them build competitive proposals for grant opportunities. So that can be through a really broad outreach at conferences and workshops or webinars like this. It can be specifically following up with folks on specific proposal ideas and helping them craft language for a proposal. Or it can be helping to troubleshoot, whether that's with folks who have submitted for a grant and haven't been selected for funding, or it can be with existing grantees who might be having an issue with the grant that they have been awarded for. So a range of different support is available, really meant to just help you, and it's all free technical assistance taken care of by the Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So there are 4 different NFWF funding opportunities in Connecticut that I want to make you aware of today. We'll be focusing on the last 2, so I won't cover those on this slide. But the first is the Northeast Forest and Rivers Fund. So this is a program that was formerly known as the New England Forest and Rivers Fund. So you might have known it under that previous name, a slight shift since it now covers much of upstate New York. But this program is meant to enhance forest and river habitat across all of the Northeast region. Grants typically range between $75,000 and $300,000. And again, it's meant to restore and sustain forest habitat. So there are other priorities that are relevant for the fund, but that's the main through line here. So if you've got a project that, specifically focuses on habitats in those ecosystems, that may be the right fit for you. And I would encourage you to look into that program further. There's also the America the Beautiful Challenge. This is a much larger national program that has upwards of 119 million annually for conservation and restoration across the entire country. It's meant for large-scale projects, and the point here that I really want to draw your attention to is the shared funder priorities. So because NFWF is kind of this national philanthropic arm of the government, money comes from a lot of different sources. And for America the Beautiful in particular, this program receives money from the Departments of Defense, Interior, and Agriculture. So projects that are competitive and ultimately would get funded in this program address the shared priorities of those departments. So projects should have a strong connection to defense and military interests, interior and parks interests, as well as agricultural interests coming out of USDA. So if you have a project that happens to check all those boxes, maybe it's in a Sentinel landscape, I would definitely direct you towards the America the Beautiful program, as there tends to be some good funding opportunities there. And then these last 2, again, the Coastal Resilience Fund and the Futures Fund, are 2 programs that our team at Throwe Environmental works on directly. So we're going to take a deep dive into each of those, starting with the Futures Fund. So I will begin here, and then I'll pass it off to my colleague Joanne Throwe to cover NCRF. But for the Futures Fund, there is about $12 million available for this cycle of funding, which is currently open. Applications will be due May 13th, and I'll repeat that a few times. But there's currently $12 million out there right now, which is the highest that we've seen in the past few cycles. A lot of that money is coming from the BIL, the IRA, and some of these other large federal investments. So I would say strike while the iron's hot, the money's there, and definitely consider applying while funding is elevated. Most of the funding from this program is coming from EPA, the Long Island Sound Study, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I would pay attention to that, especially with EPA being listed first here. That means that water quality improvements are really the top priority of this fund, especially when we're looking in inland Connecticut and the non-coastal areas of the state. So if you're working in Connecticut, which I assume everybody here is, you're probably familiar with this Long Island Sound Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, or what they call the CCMP. And essentially, this is the plan that comes out of the Long Island Sound study that is meant to, organize and orient us and orient folks across the region as they're working to improve the health and the living resources of the sound itself. So that plan has a lot of different components to it. Because it's so broad, there's a lot of visioning that happens. And they've got what they call cross-cutting principles, and you'll see that at the top of the slide. Those are really the themes that are meant to be interwoven through every proposal that comes into this fund. So if you can think of the sound study as the organization or the effort that's meant to improve the sound as a whole, and the CCMP as the plan that's meant to guide that, you could think of the Futures Fund as the funding arm of all of that, right? They're the ones putting money on the ground, or at least one of several programs that is doing that to improve the health of the sound. So as you're working on proposals for this fund, I would look back to the CCMP and think about how you can integrate resilience, sustainability, and environmental justice pretty much wherever possible, because those principles are meant to really come into play at every point in a proposal. From there are these broad themes that are meant to narrow folks down and meant to help organize us as we're submitting applications. So there are 3 different themes of the program that are eligible for the state of Connecticut. We're only going to highlight 2 today because our work as field liaisons at Throwe Environmental is focused on non-coastal Connecticut. But I do just want to mention that the second theme, which we won't cover in depth, it's the Thriving Habitats theme, and that is meant for restoration on the coast. So there's a coastal area, and you'll see that on the map, but that theme is mostly focused on restoration and coastal habitats. Our team doesn't work a ton on that, but I'd be happy to direct you to the teams that do if that's of interest for everyone. One theme that we do work directly on, which is available for the entire state of Connecticut, as well as the entire upper basin in Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire, is called Clean Waters and Healthy Watersheds. And essentially, this is your water quality theme. This is where projects are meant to improve or reduce nitrogen pollution that's happening, ultimately making its way to downstream Long Island Sound. And that can take a range of different forms here. So you'll see some examples on screen, things like green infrastructure, low impact development, improvements to wastewater treatment plants. We can think about stream buffers to prevent runoff from running too fast or unimproved or polluted into the waterways that ultimately end up down in the sound. Let's see, a few more examples over here. So things like right sizing or replacing culverts, specifically when there is demonstrable nutrient benefits. So not just culverts for the sake of culverts or for transportation benefits necessarily, but really when there's a nitrogen connection that can be tied back to the erosion that's happening around a culvert. There are also opportunities here for technical assistance for agricultural projects, specifically those that are integrating best management practices that will improve runoff and nutrient issues. A few more examples here, specifically on ag, opportunities for regenerative agriculture, soil health best practices, and precision nutrient management, again, all meant to improve water quality, up there in the northern part of the basin, but ultimately down in the sound. Now, there's another theme that's specifically eligible in the state of Connecticut, as well as New York, but we're focusing on Connecticut here. This theme is sustainable and resilient communities. And this is where your public education and engagement projects fit in, and also where resilience projects fit in throughout the entire state. So anywhere in the state of Connecticut that's geographically eligible for this program can submit for a resilience project under this theme. And just quickly to cover some of the examples of projects here, when it comes to engagement and education, those would be things like public education projects, through cleanups or public access, any type of campaigns, whether it's digital or in person, that's meant to market projects that improve the health and resources of the sound. There's opportunities for EJ initiatives here, as well as public access, again, tied back to the health and well-being of the sound and the sound ecosystem as a whole. And then lastly here, we've got these resilience projects. So you'll hear resilience as kind of a through line throughout this entire presentation. And Joanne will go in a little bit later into the National Coastal Resilience Fund. So I just want to make the distinction here. The National Coastal Resilience Fund, or the NCRF, is a much larger program that focuses nationally, while this program is specifically focused on the Long Island Sound watershed. Essentially, the projects that are eligible for both of those programs are very, very similar, right? They're meant to be nature-based or natural infrastructure or green infrastructure projects that help address resilience or coastal resilience challenges. And that can be, resilience in terms of the entire watershed. So not necessarily just on the shore, but even further inland where tidal resilience is an issue. You see flooding or increased precipitation, things like that. So when folks are considering which program to apply for, I would just keep in mind that, the Futures Fund is a regional program. It's focusing quite a bit on Connecticut. And if you've got a project that you think is competitive in a program like that, that's only focused on a region, I would pay attention to the dollars that are right in your backyard, right? They're meant to be spent in the Long Island Sound watershed. If you've got a much larger project that exceeds the limits on this program, which we'll go over, or something that you think is so large scale it would be competitive nationally, then NCRF might be a good program for that. So there are different projects that are different fits for each program. And if there's questions about that, we can certainly brainstorm where one might fit better than the other. And lastly, before I go to the next slide here, I just want to highlight that the CCMP will be updated in 2025. It's a 5-year plan. So it's almost at the end of its current life cycle. So there will be some changes next year. We don't know exactly what those are yet, but I would just flag that for you as you think about the next round of funding. So I mentioned the geography here. The program runs from the North Shore of Long Island all the way up through the Connecticut River along Vermont and New Hampshire's border. And it considers that entire watershed. So you'll see the whole program geographic boundary in red on the right. It covers nearly all of Connecticut, aside from a very small sliver in the southwest corner. So essentially, the entire state is eligible. And on this next slide, you'll see the difference between the coastal and inland areas of Connecticut. So the coastal zone, for the sake of the Futures Fund, is considered everywhere in orange, right? So Stamford, Bridgeport, all the way over to New London and the Rhode Island border. Inland Connecticut is everything that you see in light green. So again, just to reiterate, the entire state can work on water quality, resilience, and public education projects. And those communities in the orange zone can specifically focus on habitats and coastal restoration projects through the second Thriving Habitats theme. If you are not in that orange zone, though, you'd be focused on water quality, resilience, or public education projects. So the grants in this program can really be at any stage of a project life cycle. They're not just about implementation or shovel-ready projects. It can also be used for, phases of a project to tee up eventual shovel-ready implementation. So by that, I mean, you can submit for planning, community engagement to help kind of outline your priorities and eventually plan out a project that will be implemented in the future. It can also take the form of preliminary or final design, site assessment, feasibility study, alternatives analysis. There's room for all of that in this program. Or if you are ready to implement, you of course can submit for implementation. Depending on the phase that you're in, the dollars will change in terms of how much you can request. So a planning or a design project can range anywhere between 50,000 and 500,000. An implementation project can go from 50 to 1.5 million. And then any public participation or education project can go between 50 and 100,000. So these are hard limits. It's a minimum or a maximum. You have to stick within this framework. So I would say if that's not enough or if it's too much, I would definitely consider what other opportunities are out there, because these are the guidelines for this program. So some general guidance here as you're considering whether to submit a proposal. The project period of performance typically starts, within 6 months of the award actually being issued. So the program deadline for this cycle is May of this year. It's May 13th, as you can see on screen. The review period happens throughout the summer and the fall, with awards announced in November, but typically dollars start to flow in January. So you would want to start a project within 6 months of that January point at which dollars are starting to be to come out of NFWF, and they need to be spent within 2 years of the grant award. Now, if you've got a larger implementation project, there's a little bit of wiggle room there, so they can be spent within 3 years, but really 2 to 3 years is the maximum here, the maximum life cycle of the project. And specifically on match, as everyone can expect, this question comes up a lot. This program has a 50% required match amount. So that is 50% of the requested amount of funding. So if you're asking for 100,000, you also need to bring 50,000 to the table. Now that can be tough for folks. So I would just really emphasize match can be cash, but it can also be in-kind contributions, whether that's staff time, volunteer time, materials, equipment, land can be considered match. You can't acquire land with this funding, but you can certainly consider land as match if it's done within the period of performance. And that match can come from applicants directly or their partners. So I would cast a wide net here and think about how you can engage other municipalities, nonprofits, the state, foundations, really anyone that runs the gamut when we think about partners to help hit that 50% mark when it comes to match. But just remember, it must be deployed during the period of performance. So that's the start and the end date of your grant. Some ineligible activities here, just to make sure this is clear. Research or new educational curriculum, that generally is not fundable. We're looking for projects that are really aiming for implementation of on-the-ground projects here. So that would also make something like kind of continued operations or staff time ineligible. Now you can use staff time if it's part of the project. So if you're conducting planning or implementing a project and you're using your staff to do that, that is certainly eligible. But funding a single staff member, and if that was the only activity that you're doing in a grant, funding that staff member over multiple years probably wouldn't be eligible. You're also not allowed to use this funding for marketing and promotional items, merch from a community event. Again, you can't use it for land acquisition or for easements, and of course, not for anything political like lobbying or fundraising. New in 2024, they've got these proposal labs that are available. So essentially, in addition to the field liaison support that our team at Throwe Environmental can offer you, you can also book proposal labs with the program team at NFWF directly. So these are kind of half-hour, office-hour blocks that you can book that are happening throughout the middle of April, where you can bring a project idea right to folks at NFWF and ask them some of these key questions. And in response, they might help you work through the questions that you see on the screen, like what is the problem that you're facing? What's the proposed solution? How nature-based is that solution? Where's the project located? What's the size of the grant that you're asking for? What type of match are you bringing, or how are you engaging partners? And you can help work through any specific issues that you're seeing with an application or specific questions you have. Of course, our team is still available though. So if you've got questions about how to make your idea more competitive or how to frame a project in an application, you can certainly reach out to us. So I'll just reiterate again, proposals are due May 13th by midnight. The review period takes place over the summer and the fall, and they typically announce awards in November, and we'll do so publicly with dollars being available at the start of the new year. So with that, I'll just remind folks, if there are questions, you can put that in the Q&A box. We'll get to those towards the end. And now I'm going to pass it over to Joanne Throwe, who will go through the National Coastal Resilience Fund opportunity.
Thank you, Kyle. Great as always. I appreciate it. So yes, we'll switch gears. Differences between these funds I will absolutely point out. Next, Kyle will move slides for me. So let me just give you a little context for the National Coastal Resilience Fund. It's a few years old now, 2018. It was started. We started being field liaisons, and the fund was 30 million. Then it got to a little over, and it went up to 40 million. And we thought that was such a huge amount. So imagine looking at right now having $144 million available for resilience. And you think that's so much, but really, this is a national program where Kyle was just talking about Long Island Sound Futures Fund, very focused area. This is all the coastal parts of the United States. So we're going to give you some information to try to make you as competitive as possible, give you some background on this, and hopefully have some Q&A. So basically, thanks to the BIL, this fund has really grown, and there are partners, funding partners, as you see on this slide. NOAA giving considerable amount this year, last year, this year. There's an emphasis on Department of Defense investments with outside the installation. So if you're looking at a community that is close to an installation, definitely, talk to us. If there's partnerships there, but you've got AT&T, TransRe, you've got EPA. So you've got several different investors into this program. The only ones who make the decision on the funding will come back to NFWF, okay? So there are other, private investors, but they're not deciding who gets this. So focus on NFWF and their priorities. Their priorities being that they are, as Kyle was talking about, nature-based projects. This is for this fund too. They want to see an enhancement of resilience on the coastal communities, but it has to also include, what are the impacts to fish, wildlife? What are the impacts to the habitat, right? It's got to be equal weight, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Next. So, if you're looking, I'm not quite sure where everybody is calling in from, but we've got a good mix for you. Kyle talked about some funding for non-coastal areas, but if you're coastal, you have a resilience project and you're looking at this map. NFWF has a really terrific map that you could put, and you see on the top of the screen, you could put your location in here and make sure you're in the orange here. It really will cover quite a bit of the coastal area, obviously, in Connecticut, so you're in good shape. But really go back to that footprint. If you're not quite sure if you're coastal, go back to the map or just reach out to us and we can help you with that. Next. So there's a few things I mentioned, but I want to reiterate here. This is not about building seawalls, right? This is about investing in nature-based solutions. So sometimes we get questions about maybe 80% might be hard infrastructure, 20% might be green infrastructure, nature-based solution projects. That's not what this is. So you really were looking at implementation of nature-based solutions. So we also are looking at what is the impact to the community, right? Are we protecting the community from more flooding, erosion, other things that might happen that you are seeing in your community that you could be addressed by some investment dollars here. We also the funder is National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We need to see that there is that benefit to habitat. We need the fish and wildlife benefit. And when you're thinking about your proposal, and Kyle and I see this, the team sees this often, you're really strong in one area. Perhaps you're great at writing this pre-proposal and you've got the resilience factors down, and you just don't have enough to add to the, what bird species might be impacted or whatnot. Then reach out to other partners, get that information. It really is important, and it's going to be just as important as the resilience factor. Next, Kyle. Okay, so who's eligible? It's pretty straightforward. You've got your state, you've got your local governments, you've got your nonprofits, educational institutions, for-profit, which is very unusual for programs to cover for-profit, but this one does. I would say if you are a for-profit organization, you're a company on this, perhaps you're writing on behalf of a community and submitting, make sure the community's invested, right? Make sure you're engaging the right groups and you're doing this because somebody else couldn't take the lead. You're also looking at, semi-federal organizations. Let's say Sea Grant is a good example of that. But if we've had a few questions about how about federal agencies coming in on behalf of the local government, federal agencies having their support to be able to leverage what their investments are is awesome. It's just amazing, but use them as leverage and partners, not as the lead agency, lead submission as the applicant. Next. So I want to pull out a few things that would make a stronger proposal. things that the reviewer will use in part of your criteria, right, when they're reviewing your project. So they'll first look, who's involved? Is the community involved? Is there good stakeholder engagement here? You know, if you think about this, getting to the point of implementation, the last thing a funder wants to see is you've gone this far to do, you know, site assessment, preliminary design, and then you're pretty much ready. And then the community is really saying, look, you know, this isn't what we want. So every step of the way, there should be meaningful, and I mean meaningful, community engagement. Make sure all the partners who you think should be at the table are at the table, not just a letter of support. What are they doing as part of the project? What role will they have? Who do you need to include that you don't have? So think about an 140 million plus fund. You know, they're looking for projects that have scale, right? Doesn't mean that if your project doesn't have, if it isn't large enough, it's pretty small, but it might have significant impact, right? It might have that impact to the community. So think about how you're looking at the scale of your project to be able to address the problem at hand that you have identified. And also, what I find interesting about this particular fund is they like to include and look at innovative techniques. They're constantly trying to learn, right? They've been in this business a long time, grant making business, and they love to be able to say, well, that's a cool design. I really think we should just try that out and see if it works. So don't be afraid if you have something unique that you want to try. It's very innovative. Let's hear about it. Transferability. You know, if you're I grew up in Milford, Connecticut. I now live in Rhode Island. So let's say Milford, Connecticut has a project that they think perhaps Bridgeport or New Haven may eventually want to learn about. Can the things that were done in Milford be shared eventually and transferred? Some of the techniques in Milford be transferred to New Haven. I'm giving that as an example. Can you share it with Rhode Island, where I'm from, right? Can you be able to, would it have broader scale than that? So think about it. It doesn't always happen that it's the case, but just think, is there anything you could do to expand the reach and the knowledge and the information you learned on your project to others? Also think about who the underserved community is that will benefit from this. And maybe there's not. That's okay, but the underserved community, make sure you're pointing that out. Sometimes there's a particular part of a city that will really benefit for this. Well, bring attention to that, please. Okay, next. So here are the categories. I'll go into a little more detail on each one. But just like in the Long Island Sound Futures Fund, there's pretty much a category for every part of your project. So if you're just starting out and you just have a group of partners who are not sure where you need to invest, you know, the nature-based solutions, where it's going to be, you're starting at the beginning, and there's a place for that at the community capacity and building and planning space stage. So then through a site assessment, final design, restoration, right? So somewhere you fit in on your project. And what we don't want to see is you say, you know what, by the time we get this grant done, we're going to go from community capacity to site assessment. We're going to go 1 and 2 categories. Let's include it all. That is not going to happen. That's not good for you. Don't do it. Stick within your lane. Stick within which category you want, which one is appropriate. And if you're confused, talk to us. You know, you want to get in the pipeline. There's a lot of money for this program right now. This fund will have money for the next few years with thanks to the BIL. So get yourself in the pipeline. It makes sense. It's not a heavy lift. Next. So let's take the planning stages of this. So let's say you're coming in. I had a call with Louisiana about this one, this category this morning, and they had all the pieces here, right? They they basically had the partners engaged. They wanted to come up with a plan at the end of their time together with all the partners involved. They wanted to be able to say, look, we have a problem, severe erosion. We know that something needs to be done that's nature-based, but we're not sure what. That's great. Come in for this one. We want to see stakeholder engagement. Well, you can add in the capacity that's needed to organize the effort. That's what this is for. We want to see that by the end of this, that plan will get you to some of your resilient features that you are nature-based features that you are considering. Great place to start. It averages, I would say, the difference between this one and Long Island, Kyle pointed out, there are very fine lines where, what you ask for Long Island. This has flexibility in that they're not dictating to say, you can only come in for 100,000 or 200,000. They're basically letting you decide what your needs are. Does that mean you could ask for $1 million right away? You could, but make sure your project matches the budget you're asking for on all of these categories. Next, Kyle. All right, so perhaps you're in this site assessment and preliminary design. You already have a plan. You know what you're supposed to do, right? And at the end of this, you're supposed to be at preliminary design 30 to 60%. You're ready to make a go, no-go decision, and you know pretty much where that site's going to be, right? So key pieces of this particular one, key components, you've already had that plan that prioritizes your activities. They can cite that, yes, this is important. This is why we've determined this. You basically are focusing on that specific assessment aspect of this, and you're already having some permitting conversations, very early stages, but at least you're starting to get your ducks in a row here. And you could include, you're not required in this category, you could include the baseline monitoring. And again, we're doing the average. Let's say the average award is from 100 to 1 million and everywhere in between. And I'm just going to caution you, work hard on your budget early on anything you do on a grant. I've been working on grants for too many years. And, the budget is probably one thing you really need to pay attention to. Get it done right. Get it done right the first time. Really think through what your needs are, because there's no second guessing, and contractors might work with you to help you get that information, but funders always know, is that way off base? No guessing is bottom line. Work on this. Go ahead, next category. Thank you. Final design and permitting. Okay, again, flexibility on what you're asking for. This one tends to be obviously a higher category, trying to get to 100% final design. You are, into your permitting conversations, and you've done all the things I already mentioned on the other two categories, such as prioritizing your planning activities, you're getting projects ready for restoration, implementation, you're ready for those permits, and you still should think about monitoring. Next. At this one, this is the big one, right? This is an area where you can ask up to 10 million. And we've been working with a few applicants who have got the 10 million request. This is, you've got the scale we were talking about. You're thinking about transferability, and every stage, every category you are in, you're thinking about stakeholder engagement. So let's say you're asking for $1 million on restoration or 2 million. Make sure this one you're including monitoring. You have to include monitoring. We had a community who asked for a certain amount, got funded, didn't include the amount for monitoring, and they might lose money because once you ask for it and it's awarded, you can't change the amount later saying, oops, I didn't ask enough. Back to my point about making sure your budget is well done. So when you get to this one, your key components, right? You have a clear understanding of those permits. That's going to be a big thing. You need to be, working already on your permits. And if you're not ready, you're not ready. You might be in a different stage, but Start working with field liaisons. We're free. We're at your disposal. It makes for better proposals. You know, get everything together. This is the big category they want you to get to. Next. So thinking about the timeline. So Kyle mentioned proposal labs are taking place now for Long Island Sound Futures Fund. There's only full proposal. Use the proposal lab to get you that feedback you need, right? But this one, we can certainly do proposal labs with you. That is not a problem. Just reach out. We're doing them all the time. But we don't have a lot of time for that pre-proposal due date. It's due April 10th. Mid-April, you've got to have everything in a row, you know, two to 3 pages, 2.5 pages, and you need to be looking at the RFP that came out and saying, does this line up? Am I asking what they are allowing? Am I saying the things that are in the RFP? In 2 pages, 3 pages, it's not much space to say a lot of things. So we talked about thinking through the species that might be impacted, what resilience factors are going to be in place, you know, who are you impacting? So work on that. It's still time, plenty of time, 2 weeks to get this together. Then May, full proposal invites will be sent out pretty much towards the end of May. I think they're shooting for May 29th. But you know, it'll be end of May, invite only. If you get to the point where you get asked for the full proposal, I would say maybe reach back out to us, get some feedback, make sure your full proposal is, you know, in line with everything we've talked about already here. So full proposals due by July 2nd, I believe the date is. That's what they're shooting for. And then about November, it's usually around Thanksgiving time where they announce the awards. Sometimes they'll ask for site visits or more information, but that's about when it happens. And then usually January, February, you'll have a contract in place. Next. So Chris Cortina from our team manages all the communications for us, but here's his email, chris@throwe-environmental.com. But certainly Kyle and I are available to you for Long Island or NCRF. So with that, I think Kyle and I prompted a few questions or clarifications, and we're happy to do that.
All right, we don't have any questions in the chat. So I'd say that good job. You explained everything perfectly.
Or we put them to sleep. I don't know.
That too.
Sarah, I don't know. We'll throw out a couple things. Sarah, if we have time, if there's no questions, can we bring up a couple maybe extras that might make more competitive proposals?
Let me first ask if anybody had any questions about their specific proposal. Because I know that we had prompted folks to know that if they had any questions about their proposal, that they could use this time to ask that. If you do have any questions, feel free to use the raise hand function. If we don't have anything, then we'll go for the tips Joanne was mentioning.
Kyle, why don't you, let's start on Long Island Sound Futures Fund. One of the things we talked about is the proposal labs, and they have, my experience is, now you have such experts within NFWF and your field liaisons who can really make for a much stronger proposal. We are seeing when people take advantage of field liaisons, you are getting, more quality proposals because
that's right.
Right. We're here. We've been doing this for a little while. And Long Island Sound, you're getting quite a bit of expertise. Our focus in the Upper Basin, we've had a lot of outreach. We encourage people to certainly reach out. Kyle, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I see a question in the chat. Oh, yep. Go ahead, Sarah. Okay, yep, I'll get it. Yeah, so I think this question in the chat actually ties right in with what my response was going to be. So NFWF has proposal labs, and they have comments that they give folks when they submit. And if they don't get funded, they can give those comments to the applicant, they give them to our team, and we can work together and help you kind of rework your proposal for the following funding cycle. So just to directly answer the question in the chat, there is no pre-proposal for the Futures Fund. It's just those proposal labs. So because there isn't that kind of intermediate milestone where you can submit a short pre-proposal for the Futures Fund, I would say now is a great time to take advantage of the proposal labs and help, craft your idea with the guidance of the folks at NFWF and the folks from the Field Liaison team. And I bring this up in the context of the feedback that you can get if you're not funded, because we've seen really great success rates from those proposals who haven't made it the first year, but come back with some additional comments from the reviewers at NFWF, rework their proposals to address those comments, reapply, and then, get funded. So it's not a guarantee, and I don't have an exact percentage, but those that come back in a second year, and work to revamp their proposals tend to do well. At least they're more competitive. So I would highly take advantage of the decline comments that you may have gotten in the past, but why wait for those decline comments? Get some of that feedback now from the folks in the proposal labs while it's available.
That's great. It's amazing how many people don't bother getting feedback, and they might have been very close with a little tweaking, like you say, Kyle. You come back the next year in a more competitive proposal. Sometimes it doesn't fit, right? But at least get the feedback and use the resources. Like I said, we are available. Not every fund has that. I would say NFWF, EPA, they're really trying to make sure that the resources are there. So you're not guessing, you're taking advantage of making a strong proposal. Most of the people who are applying probably can use a little tweaking, and it makes sense to take advantage of it. It's hard to always hit it right on the money every time.
While folks are thinking through other questions, I did want to clarify too. So I put 2 links in the chat while Joanne was presenting. So the first is called the CREST tool, and that stands for Coastal Resilience Evaluation and Siting Tool. That is a resource that you can use for both the Futures Fund, the NCRF. You can use it for any program, whether it's NFWF or otherwise. Essentially, that's a mapper to show you where NFWF has identified a high likelihood that the project area delivers a lot of resilience benefits. So if your project happens to fall in a CREST resilience hub, that's great. That makes your proposal look good, whether it's for NFWF, for EPA, for a state grant. So call that information out in a proposal, because now not only are you articulating the resilience benefits, but NFWF's doing that work for you. The second link that I put in is the geographic footprint for NCRF in particular. So this one, the second link, you have to be within the orange boundary to be funded by NCRF. You can't be outside of that boundary because those are the geographic limits of the program. The CREST tool is an optional resource. I would say use it to your advantage. If it doesn't give you any advantage, skip right past it. Oh, and the link to the CREST tool gets an error, so let me see if I can find the correct link here.
And Kyle,
thank you for pointing that out.
I'm going to share on the slides. So on the first part of the presentation, when Kyle was showing you the slides on the Long Island Sound footprint as well, Kyle will Sarah, we're going to work with you to get these slides out, right? So they'll have that, but maybe we add that link as well, so people know whether the project's in the Long Island Sound Futures Fund area.
And I just put hopefully the correct link to the CREST tool in the chat. I did get an error message the first time I tried to get it. So I would say if you are getting that error, refresh and try to do it again. It seems like a temporary thing.
And maybe some other points on both funds, I would say, I keep reiterating, think through the budget, think through the partners. You would be amazed how many people we talk to have the information. They're just not working on getting the details. So when NFWF, for example, is looking at the budget you request, think about the details. Don't just put, capacity, or, if you need money for it, ask for what you need, but give a little explanation. Try not to have the reviewers work so hard, but really think through that. I know you don't have a lot of room, but try to maximize what you do have. For instance, reread the RFP a few times. There are going to be certain words that jump out at you. I always like to tell people to outline it, highlight it. I'm old school like that, but you see those words over and over. And like Kyle said, go to the CCMP, start seeing how your project idea connects with the CCMP. Use the field liaisons to talk through things. We're just that resource for you. But these are really good tips for you on both funds, certainly.
Yeah, but writers have a saying of show, don't tell. So
Yeah.
it's really, especially when you're evaluating the applications, just remember that the people evaluating are not in your brain. So you need to explain what you're trying to do clearly and concisely.
Sarah, that's a good point.
Right.
And I want to bring that up on the nitrogen loading for the Futures Fund in particular. So I've gotten a lot of questions about this over the past 2 weeks in Connecticut, but also farther north up in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And several either potential applicants or folks that applied last year and are considering applying again because they didn't get funded, they're hitting this kind of decision point where they say, can I articulate the nitrogen benefits or not, right? Like, can I give specific numbers to how much nitrogen pollution my project is preventing, or am I not going to be able to do that? And I think that's an example of show, don't tell, because the reviewers, you can't just tell them, oh, it's going to reduce a lot of nitrogen because we're preventing sediment downstream. They know that, that's great, but that's not news to the reviewers. They need to know specifically, show me how much nitrogen. And there are resources out there. You're not on an island by yourself for that. NFWF, they highlight different pollution reduction calculators that you can use. You can, go through the internet. If you find a reputable source that has a way to calculate nitrogen reductions, whether that's for a culvert replacement or for, streamlined buffers, whatever it might be, if you've got a best management practice and you've got a way to calculate those nitrogen reductions, use that, start to extrapolate on that and show the reviewers, this is how much we think we can reduce. That will help them contextualize it with all the other proposals they're reading. And now you can show, hey, my project is effective. And not only is it effective, it's cost efficient in how we're reducing those nutrient loads.
Same thing with like resilience, that a lot of times we'll see applications, and I've actually helped review for both NFWF and for both NCRF and Long Island Sound Futures Funds over the years, and we'll see applications that say increase resilience. Okay, how? What is going to be more resilient? What does that mean? So
Right.
you need to have the second part on that sentence of like, what is this actually going to do? Because just telling me this is going to increase resilience is not telling me anything. It's not showing me anything.
And one way you can do that on resilience in particular, you can talk about like the quantity of water. You can talk about how many gallons of stormwater that you're preventing, or the flooding that's happening. You can also cite critical infrastructure that's at risk. So if the flooding is affecting an elementary school or city hall or a roadway that the hospital workers need to get to work, like if there's critical infrastructure there, identify that, because that is important and that will really stand out in an application. If you just say we're experiencing flooding on roads, what roads? How important are those roads? Everybody's experiencing flooding on roads. So when you can start to call out populations, infrastructure, community systems that are at risk, that really starts to sell your proposal.
Yeah, and I'll add also take advantage of letters of support. So for the Long Island Sound Futures Fund, if you've got a full proposal, and honestly, it's there, you have so many things to say. You're trying to be very concise to try to get everything in there. But then you have the letters of support, and a lot of people will give let's say a generic type of letter support to a partner, and then they just sign it and they barely fill in anything. But work with that partner, realize that there's details you can really add. Reviewers review all of it. Don't think they're just going to wash over that. They want all the details. And sometimes you see letters of support, they all look exactly the same. That's not a good practice. Take your time to use that as additional language to add to your proposal? What details do you want the reviewer to see, review, to know about?
Mhm.
So, and
I've seen
again,
an example this cycle, Joanne, this making me think of it. This is a project in the Gulf, but the comments from the reviewers said, I'm pretty sure this project is duplicating state efforts, right? It was a municipality, and they said, I think we're already funding this. Why is this project being proposed? And when I brought that comment to the folks who submitted the application, they were like, no, that's not what's happening. And they were really adamant that we're not duplicating efforts. So I would say for something like that, yeah, you can work that into your proposal, and you can say we're not duplicating efforts, we're filling gaps. But take advantage of the letter of support. If you've got a letter of support from the state, have the state reiterate the points of your proposal that you need the reviewers to see. This isn't duplicating efforts, this is augmenting state efforts. Things like that, right? Help convince the reviewers at every turn. So that's something that came up for me. One quick thing I want to mention too, I heard about this at the Connecticut Land Conservation Conference this weekend, is about the QAP plans. So a lot of folks get nervous about the Futures Fund because EPA funding can trigger a QAP plan, which is a quality assurance and performance plan. Essentially, there are certain circumstances under which, if you're collecting data, EPA requires you to do this extra planning to ensure that that data is managed and collected properly. And I'll just say, if data is being collected for decision-making purposes, you do need a QAP plan. If it's not for decision-making or prioritization, you do not. And even if you do require one, there's technical assistance available through NFWF to help you through that. And you can put the dollars that you need to spend to complete that plan in your funding request. So they're not leaving you on an island for that. There's certainly ways to get through it. So if you've got questions, please reach out on that. And don't let that stop you from applying.
yeah, people get scared. They hear QAP, and they just get too scared. But really, NFWF has set it up. As Kyle said, they have the resources. They're putting even an online library of examples. You can't access it without, basically you ask for it and you'll get the link. They're not just making it for public, viewing, but just ask for it. And it's great stuff. Take advantage of all these resources. Why not? We've seen many times where people come in last minute, have not attended a webinar to get the feedback, for example, taken the slides, read the material. Take the time. You need the money. Take the time to invest in doing it right the first time, and use every resource available to you.
All right, it's 2 o'clock, and so unless there are any other additional questions, I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and thank you especially to Kyle and Joanne from Throwe Environmental for giving us this really helpful presentation. We will be sending out an email to everybody who registered with a link to the recording, the slides, and also additional links that you might find helpful. And if you have any questions, you can also email me, or we will include a bunch of email addresses in the email that we sent out. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Sarah.